According to LawrenceCountyMemoirs.com, in June 1925, the city of Newcastle, Pennsylvania started accepting bids to build the new Lawrence County Home for the Aged, essentially a poorhouse for the county's mentally ill, severely destitute, and elderly residents with no known family. This joint city-county home, to be built in Shenango Township on the Newcastle-Elwood Road, Route 65, would replace the aging Newcastle City Home and consolidate various smaller institutions around the county. Construction was behind schedule, but the facility finally opened on Tuesday, October 19, 1926. On that day, the Snyders and their 2 children, about a dozen staff members, and the first 20 inmates left the old city home and took up residence in the nearby Lawrence County Home. The new home did not generally take children, although a young boy was among the first 20 residents. Some of the work was still awaiting completion, and the long driveway was still being paved. The old city home was abandoned soon after and was later sold. The Lawrence County Home continued its operation for many years, and in the latter half of the 1960s, while under the supervision of Director Clarence E. Covert, was remodeled and morphed into a skilled nursing center. By 1970, the home was facing severe overcrowding issues and was housing an average of about 115 elderly people at any one time. In December 1974, the county decided to update and expand the home by adding a whole new section. It was renamed as the Hill View Manor on March 22, 1977. Due to financial constraints, the county shut down Hillview Manor in January of 2004. Hillview Manor has gained quite the notoriety for being one of the most haunted locations in all of western Pennsylvania. The old home has been featured on numerous television programs, and many nationally renowned paranormalists have visited the location. Of particular interest is the 3rd floor of the main administration building where the old hospital was located. Numerous former residents died there, and at least 100 of them are buried in the small cemetery located on the grounds. And if you're familiar with this channel, then you know that we're going inside for a full-on exploration of the infamous haunted Hillview Manor. Before we go in, I have to say a few things about this place. First off, it is a business that is open for tours and paranormal investigations, but it's been decaying since 2004. It has everything an abandoned hospital would have to offer, plus I was about to learn a whole lot more. Now, as you know, I'm not a paranormal investigator, nor do I push paranormal content on this channel. But what do you do when too many coincidences happen in one building? I've been to some of the most haunted, so-called haunted locations in the country and have felt or seen nothing. A building's just a building. At least that's what I thought. It wasn't until I really started digging deep into this place that I started finding stuff out about it that was kind of disturbing. Maybe not disturbing, but it was, strange that there were so many suicides on the property, and not to mention the mass burial site that was in the back of the building. Now, these things are usually hearsay, and in the case of Hillview Manor, all of the crazy things that happen here and all of these strange occurrences are actually backed by documented fact. So it was pretty interesting to learn these things before I even entered the building, and then after entering the building, well, that was a whole other experience. I have to point out the architecture of this place because these days I know I say this a lot, but you're not going to see this type of design or any of these unique features that you see on this building because it just doesn't exist anymore. Not saying that there's not artists out there, but people don't have the patience to craft a unique structure anymore. Now it's, people used to do these things out of love, and they used to really take the time to make something beautiful. And as you know, today is instant gratification. We live in that mindset where everything has to be quick, efficient, and just hopefully it works. And back then, they built these places to last, hence why we're filming this 100 years after it was built. I need to point out that I refer to this place as a hospital quite a few times, and that is because it was they did perform some surgeries on the third floor at one point, and when it was a poor farm, they had to deal with, mentally ill people. It was almost like an asylum as well. So, and they ran it like a prison. So, but it was not a hospital. In all actuality, it was a nursing home. Now you'll notice that there's sometimes 4 lights. You'll see them hanging on the wall that were above the beds, so you can see where the beds used to be. There were 4 beds in some of these rooms. Some of the rooms only have 2, but you can see the way they're kind of sectioned off by where the lights are. The nurses' station, there's one on every floor, and each one of them is a little bit different. There's not much left behind, but in each one there's some remnants of paperwork or information of the residents that used to reside here. This was Anna's room, a former resident of Hill View Manor. Now, these residents' suitcases actually were the residents' suitcases that lived here. I'm sure they have been moved quite a few times for photos or whatever, but they are original. They weren't brought here just for props. This room belonged to a resident named Mary Virginia, and Mary Virginia was here all the way up until this place's closure in 2004, and she then moved into a different nursing home where she then passed away, but many say that her spirit is still here. She very well may have chose to spend out her afterlife in this nursing home rather than the one that she passed in. And from what I hear, that tends to happen a lot. The wrought iron railings in this place are definitely unique. It's typical to see these types of railings in an older hospital, that was built 100 years ago, but you're definitely not going to see them at your local hospital that was built any time after the 1920s. So soak it in while you can, because they're not going to exist anymore. Back in the 1930s, a man named Angelo hung himself in this bathroom, and it was above a doorway that's no longer there, but people report hearing sounds and claim that he's not very friendly, as far as through EVP anyway. He tells people to get out, and people feel kind of bad vibes in this room. I guess, rightfully so. So this is the men's cafeteria. Men and women weren't permitted to dine together. And the men had a 9-to-1 ratio over women, in this place. So women actually dined where the salon is now. It's much smaller. The salon here had pretty good vibes. It was very bright in the salon. It wasn't as dark as the rest of the hospital. But salons are interesting because a lot of conversation goes on in salons. It's almost like a therapy for most people. Barbers and stylists are kind of like, counselors. And you can almost hear the conversations that went on in here while people were changing their appearance. Women would have their hair done here twice a month and men once a month. Oh, that's awesome. Folks, you won't see that anymore. This is where the Snyders lived while they were in control of the property, which I thought was pretty interesting. Neat little fact. When this was a poorhouse and they ran it, they were known as wardens, and the patients, which what we would call patients now, were known as, or residents, were known as inmates. So they ran it almost like a prison. And when things came out about how things were ran there and some corruption, they were stripped of their authority to run the place, but they were still able to reside on the property for a short period of time afterwards. But also, I failed to mention that there was a son included in the family. It wasn't just the Snyders and their two daughters. There was a son, and no one knows too much about that boy. Notice the tile work in this bathroom. Now, most people would overlook something like that, but the time that went into doing a project like that, the tedious, tiny little squares that had to be placed perfectly, it's just I don't know. It's impressive to me because someone really spent a lot of time in this building doing all these bathrooms this way. This room belonged to a blind woman named Mary who used to live here in the facility, and she used to play jokes on the staff and put her glass eyes on the sheets that needed changed, and she had a pretty good sense of humor. Mary suffered from OCD and washed her hands 15 times a day, hence all the hand sanitizer you see. But her room was positioned right across from the bathroom so that she knew exactly where to go, being blind. People had seen full body apparitions of her, as if she was sitting right there. Back when this was a poor farm, there was a boy named Jeffrey and his brother who were orphaned here. Jeffrey was 2 years old at the time, so his brother was adopted pretty quickly because he went to work on a farm, but obviously being 2 years old, Jeffrey remained, and the staff kind of took him under their wing, and he stayed here. And after it became a old age home, many patients report seeing him shortly before they pass away. The kitchen and cafeteria area, even though they're empty, you still can kind of get a sense of what went on in here. Maybe because so much activity went on in this room and so many conversations and socializing went on, that energy kind of stays behind, and you kind of get a feeling of a lot of people gathering in one area when you're in here, even though you can hear the echo of your feet walking across the floor. Jimmy Marker is the man on the left of this photo. Now, he lived here way back when this was a poor farm, all the way up until its closure in 2004. He passed a few years later, but his spirit is said to come back, and he's one of the most active spirits in this whole facility. Now, when he was alive, he liked to play jokes on people, and he would take photos of people with his Polaroid, and it wouldn't even have film in it, and he would charge them $1, stuff like that. But he's known to be very, very active here. So this room is known to be haunted by a ghost named John Robinson, who used to be a resident at Hillview Manor, and he reportedly jumped out the window at about 9:30 in the morning, and he didn't die right away from on impact, but after he went to the hospital in Newcastle, he later died from injuries from the fall. Now you notice throughout this room that there's a lot of Steelers paraphernalia, and that's because of the spirit named George that resides in this room. The reason being, they think because he was a former maintenance man, and from years of EVP sessions speaking with him, they've kind of been able to put some things together. But don't bring up the Cleveland Browns or he will mess with you, and he likes to bang on the pipes and the furnace, and many people have seen his shadow or shadow figure throughout the room. The basement is known to have all types of activity, including, people claiming they were touched, hearing voices, seeing shadows, and there's a lot of evidence that I've seen, again, through recordings and EVP sessions where it's pretty interesting. Won't focus because all the ghosts in here. The embalming room. This embalming room has seen its fair share of bodies, over 10,000 to be exact. But back in the days of tuberculosis, when this was a poorhouse back in the 1930s, uh, everywhere saw a rapid increase of death, no matter where you lived. So bodies needed to be embalmed and buried, and it needed to be done fast, and they didn't really have a real method of how to do it. They just buried them all together, and as soon as a body went through this embalming room, it was wrapped in plastic and then buried behind the building. And in the 1960s, when two hunters were walking through the property and their dog came back to them with human remains in its mouth, the county stepped in and uncovered that there were mass graves behind this place. Now, that's not speculation. That's a fact. There were mass graves, and people were buried 3 to 4 bodies deep in one single grave. So this is where it got weird. Everything died. All my devices died, my lights, everything. So hence why I'm filming in the pitch black in this chapel. I would have loved to have lit it up and filmed it correctly, but this was the best I could do, and I wasn't going to not film it, but all my stuff died. The batteries literally went from being in the 80s percent to being at 5%, and my light died completely. So I don't know how to explain it, but usually my stuff lasts for 8 hours. This isn't my first rodeo, but you know, after an hour, everything was sucked completely dry in this place. I can't explain it, but it is what it is. Due to the state of decay that this boiler room is in, it's off limits, but I was lucky enough to get permission to film in here because the story that goes along with this room is pretty interesting. Eli, who was a former inmate back when this was a poor farm, he was an alcoholic, and he would sneak off the grounds to drink because this place was built in the Prohibition. There was no alcohol allowed on the grounds. So he would sneak off and drink, and he'd come back in the middle of the night, and he was found frozen outside. Oh, he passed away from the cold outside, and they dragged him into this boiler room and tried to revive him, but were unsuccessful. And his spirit is said to linger in this room, and it gets a lot of activity. So I figured, and it's probably one of my favorite rooms of the whole place. I mean, it's gorgeous in here. So I definitely had to film it. As we first walk in here, you're going to notice that there's some cement cylinders on the right, and those are old grave markers from the cemetery. And this bunker is said to have been used for so many different things, including possibly bodies being stored in here, but we do know for sure that there was ammunition stored here at one point. So if you're a paranormal skeptic like I am, and you need that little nudge to push you over the edge to possibly believe in ghosts, well, this place could do that for you. Made me question a lot of things, and I'm still questioning them. But thank you for joining me and exploring the Haunted Hill View Manor.
Check me out, bro.